Alright guys, so we're back with another video. In this video, we're going to go ahead and set up the authentication module for our backend. So ideally, we're going to be using Passport for authentication. For the database, we're going to be using MySQL, but you can use Postgre or really any relational database that is supported by TypeORM. TypeORM is going to be the ORM that we're going to be using. Okay, if you want, you can use MongoDB, but I'm going to be using MySQL, so I'd recommend using that to follow along. And these are just other things that we're going to use to set up. For authentication, we are going to be using OAuth2. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and create a new module. So we're going to go inside our, make sure you're in your backend directory. We're going to do nest.js for generate module. And I'm going to call this auth. I personally like to do this. I like to create the auth module. Keep that separate from everything else, because really, it really should be separate from everything else. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and create one controller. So let's do nest.js controller. This is going to go inside /auth /controllers auth, and we're going to create a service auth services auth. Alright, perfect. Now, in the auth service, we are likely going to need a user service, though I feel like we already have a user service here already, so it becomes really redundant on creating the same thing over and over again. But this user service does something different, so we'll worry about that later, though, okay? But ideally, we're going to need that later on. I just wanted to point that out. But don't worry for right now. Okay, so we have our auth module. So the first thing that we're going to do to set up OAuth2 with Discord is we need to install a couple of things. So if we actually look at the documentation for Nest.js, let me see if I can pull this up real quick. There's a lot of steps that we need to follow, but don't worry, it's not really that difficult. Okay, so we need to set up authentication, but in order to actually have authentication to work, we need to make sure we have our database set up. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set up the database first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, let's see, database, and we're going to set up TypeORM. Like I said, if you want to use MongoDB, you can. They have support from Mongo as well, and they have lots of documentation on how to set it up. But I'm going to use TypeORM. Okay, so we're going to go over here, and they have the packages that you need to install. So I'm just going to copy that. So yarn add. Now instead of MySQL, I'm going to use MySQL 2. Okay, so this will install TypeORM, NestJS, TypeORM, and then MySQL 2, the driver. Alright, so now that we're done with that, all we need to do is we just need to import TypeORM module. So remember earlier I said that down the line when we are installing other modules, we might need to, at some point we need to actually import them inside app.module.ts, and you can see that it's being imported right over here. We have users and auth, but right now we're going to import the TypeORM module just like that, and we're going to configure it by calling the for_root method. Now this for_root method is going to take in a bunch of parameters. So we're going to take in the type. So that's going to be the database type. Now you can see they have a lot of support for a lot of things. They have Postgre, SQLite, MariaDB, MongoDB, MySQL. We're going to type MySQL. Okay, now we also need the host, port, username, password, the database name, and then entities, and then synchronize true. So synchronize, when you set it to true, it will basically synchronize your database so that any changes you make to your entities will automatically update it. Okay, now entities are basically, you can think of entities like, you can think of it like models that will be resorted into a database table. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why ORMs are so powerful. They can do a lot of stuff for you. Okay, so we need a couple of parameters. So I'm actually going to put this inside the environment variable. We're going to need to configure that as well. So I'll show you how to do that. So for now, we're going to just reference MySQL DB host. That's what I'm going to name the environment variable. The username will be process.env.mysqldb user. password will be the same name convention, pass database name. So this is going to be the database name. We're going to have to manually create that because I don't think TypeORM can create that for you. What else do we need? The entities. So this will be an array of all of our entities, which we will create in just a sec. Synchronize true. And then the port. So I'll put the port up here just to keep everything organized. Okay, so I think that's really all we need for now. And we're getting this errors because string is not assignable to type a number. We're gonna have to parse this to a string or a number. So we'll do number parse int string. Now there's a chance that this might be undefined. So if it is, we'll just do port 3006, but it should be fine like that. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm actually do a couple things. One, I'm gonna create a environment.dlts file, and I'm going to declare namespace Node.js export interface process env. And what I'm going to do here is I'm basically just going to create custom types on this process env interface over here. So for example, if you actually look over here before this, right, I can actually reference the default properties on this env object, okay? But you can see that I actually can't even reference the MySQL stuff because none of those will appear. So you don't have to do this, but I do like doing this. You can actually just add your own custom types if you really want to. So I'm going for these types, I'm going to leave them all as optional. So there's a chance they might be undefined because they might not be loaded properly. Okay. String. And then we'll do the same thing over here. So this way we get IntelliSense for it. So now if you look over here, you have IntelliSense. Okay, so that's a nice thing to do. Okay, so what else do I need? I'm also going to set a port property as well. Okay, so now we actually need to set up our environment variables. We've only just referenced them. We need to actually set them up. Okay, so to do that, Nest.js actually comes with a package that you can use for configuration. Let's look at the documentation for that. So you can see over here that application, you can read all about this if you want, but we're just going to install this package over here, and it uses .env, so you don't actually need to install .env. So you can kind of do things the Nest way. Okay, so let's install the config package. There we go. All right, so now what we can do is, you can see over here it's giving us this error saying access denied for localhost, and you can see if you read right over here, it's showing an empty string and it's saying using password no, which means that our environment variables are not being loaded correctly. Okay, so the reason why you can tell is because it wasn't specifying the username and it says not using a password, which means nothing was being passed even though something should be. Okay, so let's first go into app module, and we're going to import the config module for root. Okay. And over here, you're going to pass in an file path. So we're going to need to pass in the path to our environment file. We'll do that in just a sec. For now, we need to first declare them. We need to, not declare, we need to create them, right? Because we don't have any of those files. So if you've used .env before, it's pretty similar to this. It's literally the same thing. So what you do is you name a file called .env, but I'm going to name it .development.env, or actually .env.development. And I'm also going to create one for production. This is a practice that I like to follow. You create different env files for different environments, right? Because you'll have a development environment which will use your localhost database and other URLs, and the production environment would be for things such as, like, the actual server, the actual place where you're going to deploy your app to. Okay, so we're going to need a couple of environment variables, so let me just create those real quick. The port the user, password, and then the username. Okay, so for the host, we'll do localhost. Port will be 3306. That's the default port for MySQL. You would specify whatever port it is that you have MySQL running on. For the user, this just could be my MySQL username, password. I don't really care if you guys know this because it's just localhost. Okay. And then the database name. So we're gonna have to create one. I will call this let's call it Discord dashboard. I wonder if I can have underscores. I've never really tried that, but I want to call it something simple. Let's try Discord dashboard DB. This should be fine. And we also wanted to create a port. This will be the port for the API. We're going to use port 3001. Okay, so now if I save and if I restart, you're going to see that we're going to get a different error. What's going on here? Oh, I forgot to do one thing. So we need to actually specify the file. So in the file path. So this will be the base path over here, the actual project path. Okay. So even though we are inside the source folder, you're not going to do something like this. You're going to just do .env.development. The reason why is because .env will look for the file from where you actually executed the code. So since we're executing the code inside the main directory, we are just going to pass in this path as if we were actually in the directory. Now we should get an error and it should say unknown database. That is okay because we need to create the database. Okay, we need to create it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to log into MySQL and I'm just going to create that real quick. And we're going to do create database. And then we called it, let's see, Discord dashboard DB. And there we go. So now I can exit from my app again. And everything should be okay. Yep, there you go. Perfect. Okay, so now let me go ahead and do one more thing. So like I said earlier, you're going to have different environments. Your development environment is very likely going to be different than the production because you're going to have different hosts, different ports, and etc. So what I like to do is I like to just copy paste this and then I'll change certain things up. So let's say on the production server, you'll have a different username, password for the MySQL. You might be running it on a different port. So it's good to have different configuration files. Now, how do we detect which file to run? Because right now, by default, this one will run the development file all the time. How do we actually know when to run which? Well, a common practice that you can do, what you can do is you can actually set a global operating system environment variable. Okay, you set this at the global level of your operating system. On Windows, you can simply just go to path and then set a variable called environment or whatever it is that you want. I have mine on my computer set to development. On my production servers, I usually have them set to production. Okay, so what we can do is you can say, hey, look, let's create a variable called env file path, and let's do .env.development. So by default, we're going to use the development. Okay, and so if the process.env.environment is equal to development, then what we'll do is we'll obviously do this, but we actually don't even need to do that because by default it's going to use the development one. So we'll just check to see if the environment is set to production. So if it is, then we'll just do env file path.env.production. Now you might have other environments too. Like some people like to have a testing environment, so they'll have test environment variables. So you can do something like process.env.environment. They usually call this staging, but I'll just call it test. And for that, I'll just use env.testing. And why is it giving that? Okay. And all we need to do is just get rid of this. And since these variables are the same name, this field the same name as this variable, I can just leave it like that instead of having to do this. Okay, and I'm just going to do a simple console log running in process.env.environment. Like I said, just if you're on Windows, just go to your path and just create a system variable called environment capitalized. Okay, and then it'll read it over here and just set it to development with a capital D. Like everything capitalized. That's what I do. Okay, so you can see running in development. So you can also set a temporary one too. In PowerShell, you can do something like environment equals production. And then if I do this, you're going to see it's going to run in production mode. And we're not going to get any errors because we have all of these same environment variables. Now watch this. I'm going to set it to test right now. So let's do env.testing. Okay, and this is going to be empty. Now let me do env.environment test. So right now our environment is in test. We're going to get an error because all of our environment variables are empty. Yep, perfect. There you go. You can see. That's fine. So let's set it back to development. All right, there we go. So now we know that works, and that's awesome. That's awesome. That's a way how you can switch between environments, which is pretty cool. Okay, so yeah, that's gonna be pretty much it for the configuration stuff. I think that's really all I need to talk about for that. Now, one more thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go inside this environment.d.ts, and I'm going to go ahead and just create an environment variable. Now, instead of giving a type string, I'm going to go and give it a type of environment, and it's just going to be a TypeScript union type, or a TypeScript type. And we're going to use, we're going to define our environments. So it's going to be development or testing or production or test. Okay, so now if I look over here, I actually have IntelliSense. Okay, so that's pretty cool. You don't have to do this, but I like doing that. Like I said, I like taking advantage of TypeScript's capabilities. Okay, but yeah, that's pretty cool. So I think we're pretty much done with all this stuff. So now that we have our database set up, we can actually start setting up TypeORM entities. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go into source. We're going to create a new folder called TypeORM. And I don't need to create this as a module. You can if you want to, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to create a folder called entities, and I'm going to call this user.ts. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to create a TypeORM module, or not module, we're going to create a TypeORM entity. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and first import that entity decorator. Okay, this will mark the class that we're going to create as an entity. Okay, now you can also give it a name. This will be the name of the database table. So we'll call this users, plural. Okay, now what we're going to do next is we're going to create a couple fields. So we need some fields, right? So we need fields like a username, ID, email, password, etc. Okay, now since we're using OAuth2, I am going to only save a couple things. I'm going to save the ID. Well, no, this ID is just going to be a generated ID. So this is going to be like the primary key. So I'm going to label this as a number. And we need to make sure we annotate this as a primary generated column, just like that. Okay, and that's pretty much it. We're going to also create another column now. This will be Discord ID. This will be a string. Okay, and for the name, I'm going to just give it snake case. I personally like using snake case with MySQL. We're going to create another column. We're going to call this username. That'll be the Discord username. And we'll create another column. Call it discriminator string. Create another column. I think this one's going to be the avatar. That'll be a string. And this can also be nullable because the user may not have an avatar, so in result that will be a null value. Okay, I think that should be all we need for now. You can save the email if you want to. I'm not going to do that. Okay, so now that we have our entity, okay, now if I save, nothing's going to happen because it's not going to create any table just yet. Let me actually do this. Let me actually log into MySQL. And what was the name of my database again? Discord_dashboard DB. Okay, so you can see that right now we don't have any tables. The reason why is we need to actually import this into our module. Okay, you see where we have this entities array. Now you can do this however you want. You can have it mapped to specific files. But I'm actually just going to directly import the actual entity. Now, because we may have more than one entity, what I'm going to do and what I like to do is I like to create a barrel file. So I'm going to first import user from entities/user, and I'm going to create a variable called entities, and I'm going to store this in an array, and I'm also going to import the individual entity as well. Okay, so now what I can do inside app.module is I can just literally just do this. I can pass in entities. And there we go. Now I can actually just do this actually, since it expects an array. Or you can just do this. You can pass in user like that. But like I said, you'll have a lot of entities at some point, so it's just better to put in an array. And since these are the same names, I can just do this. So now you can see that, let's see, if I go over here, you can see now we have the users table. If I describe the schema of the users table, you can see we have the ID. You can see the field is Discord_ID, but if we were to actually reference the actual property in our application, we wouldn't do Discord. We wouldn't do Discord_ID. We do Discord ID, like, so that'd be pretty cool. That's the beauty of ORMs. Okay, so now that we have our entity, we can actually start creating users, but we don't want to just randomly create users everywhere in our application. We want to actually do that in the authentication layer, okay, because that's when we are expecting the user to log in with OAuth2. For the rest of this video, we've already established the database. We're done with that. Okay, if you have any issues with that, let me know. I'll try my best to help you guys out, or I'll try my best to help you guys find a different solution. But yeah, I don't want you guys to get, too tripped up over it. But we're going to work on actually setting up the authentication layer right now. So what we're going to do is inside auth, we already have a controller. So we need to create a couple of endpoints for the user to visit. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and let's do this. Let's go and do @get. So this is going to be the /auth /login. Okay, this will be the login function. We're going to create another one. This is going to be for the redirect. And I'll explain all of these routes in just a second. Don't worry. We're going to create one for status. So this allows us to check to see if the user is logged in or not. So this will return either a 200 response or a 401 or 403. Though I think it should return a 401 though. But I think, yeah, no, don't worry about that for now. We'll have a log out route as well. So if you're not using OAuth2, then for this you'd probably want to have a post request, because if you're using like local strategy, which is basically username and password, then you would need to obviously make a post request. But since we're using OAuth2, we're only going to have GET requests. Okay, so let's explain each one of these. So for this one over here, this login route, this is the route. Let me actually just label the URL. Okay, so this route is for basically where the user is going to visit to actually log in. Whenever we visit this route, it's going to redirect us to the OAuth provider. So let me actually write that down. So this is the route the user will visit to authenticate. Okay, that's pretty simple. So whenever they visit /API/auth/login, it's going to redirect them to the Discord page, and they have to click authorize. When they click authorize, how do we know when they've actually authorized themselves? Well, on Discord's end, it's going to call our API URL, and that's going to be this redirect URL. Okay, so it's going to do /API/auth/login, or not auth login, redirect. And this is the redirect URL the OAuth2 provider will call. And like I said, if I didn't mention already, I'm going to put all the code in the description so you guys can actually refer to it, so don't worry. Okay, so now we have the status, so this is pretty straightforward. This is just going to be used for retrieving the status of the user, the auth status. And then logout is just going to be for logging the user out. So this will just be responsible for destroying the session. Okay, so with this function over here, we actually don't even need to do anything inside the function. Same thing with let's see. I think it's just going to be this login function over here. With the redirect function, the way it's going to work is basically the way Passport works in general is you have to set up two routes. You have the login route, the user visits, and you have the redirect route. When you visit the login route, what's going to happen is it's going to redirect you to Discord. Once you've successfully authenticated, Discord is going to call your redirect URL with a query parameter that has the code in the route. If you've ever seen that actual code parameter, that's the code that's used to exchange for the access and refresh token. Okay, so you use that, and what you do with that is use it to make requests. Okay, so pretty much the login function, we're not going to be implementing anything at all, so I can just probably return anything I want. It doesn't really matter. For the redirect, this is where we're going to want to actually redirect the user to, let's say, a specific page in our application. Typically, you'd probably want to redirect them to your client, but let me go ahead and just get the response object, because we're not really going to use the request object at all. And I'll just send 200. The status, we're going to use a guard to actually check to see if the user is authenticated. Okay, so hopefully all these routes make sense. Okay, but right now what we need to do in order to actually invoke the OAuth2 stuff, we need to actually set up the strategy. So let's go ahead and do that. I think I've already installed it earlier, and then we kind of got sidetracked with setting up the database stuff. Did I install Passport? No, I don't think so. So let's go over to the documentation, and let's actually look at what we need to do. So you can see over here that we need to install a couple things. We need to install the Nest.JS Passport package. Again, this is just a wrapper. Okay, we're going to install the base Passport, and then instead of Passport local, we're going to install Passport Discord, or if you're using Twitter, Google, you install those respective packages. Okay, if you want to find out more Passport strategies, you can actually just Google it. Just Google Passport.js strategies, and you'll find it very easily. Okay, so let's go ahead and just copy these two. And I'm going to go, let me open up a new pane over here. And let me do dashboard tutorial. Okay, now let's go ahead and do yarn add. And we're going to add one more package. This is going to be Passport Discord. So this is 3 packages total. Let me actually just move this to the side, and let me just zoom in. So you can see we have Nest.js Passport, and then Passport-Discord. Okay, so that should be pretty straightforward. Let's install it. And there we go. All right, so now that we have that installed, we can follow the documentation and see how they do certain things, but everything should be pretty straightforward though. What we need to do is inside the auth service is we need to create this function called validate user. Okay, and then we're going to call this validate user function from our Passport strategy. Okay, so this validate user function is going to be responsible for searching for a user, and if there's a user found, we're going to either return it, or we can also update and return the updated value. If the user is not found, we're going to create it and then return that newly created user. Okay, so we need to set up the auth service, and then we also need to set up the strategy file, which is this right over here. I'm going to set up the strategy file first. Okay, so first let's go into the auth module. Let me close up all my tabs. So I'm going to create I'll create a folder called guards, and I'm going to go ahead and create an index.ts file. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and import some stuff. So we're going to import strategy, not from Passport local, but from Passport Discord. Okay, so Passport Discord. Might need to install the types for this. Okay, no, I don't, thank God. So many stuff that we have to install. I think I actually might need to, because it seems like strategy is not being... It should have given me the IntelliSense for that. For some reason it didn't. So let me actually install the types for this real quick. Shouldn't take too long. Okay. There we go. Perfect. Alright, so now that we have that, the next thing that we need to do is we're going to import Passport strategy. And this is going to be a class that we're going to extend. Okay? So let's go ahead and do that. Let me actually move my terminal to the other screen. So import Passport strategy from, I think, where's it from again? Nest.js Passport, yep. Okay, and we also need to import injectable. Okay, this is going to make it so that we can actually inject this guard wherever we want. And I'll show you how to inject it later on. That's going to come from Nest.js common. And yeah, that's going to be pretty much it. So let's go ahead and use the injectable decorator. I'm going to create a class. I'm going to call this Discord strategy. Oh wait, why did I call this guards? I should have, sorry about that. I should have called this strategies. Sorry about that, I apologize. Alright, so we're going to do export class. I know it probably confused you guys, but I got confused for a second. This should be strategies, not guards, okay? Sorry about that. So we're going to create the Discord strategy class, and then we're going to extend Passport strategy. And we're going to give this strategy, we're going to pass in the strategy instance. And we're going to give, and I think that should be it. So we don't need to pass in like a string or anything like that. So this way you'll know which strategy this is. Okay, so since we are extending Passport strategy and we're passing in this strategy over here, it will know that it's the Discord strategy, which is good. Okay, so now since we are extending this class, we're going to set up the constructor, and it's going to give us an error. Okay, since we're extending, we need to call the superclasses constructor. So to do that, we do super keyword, parentheses, and that's it. Now what we need to do actually is we need to actually pass in our OAuth2 client credentials. So we need the client ID, the client secret, and then the callback URL. I'm going to get that in just a sec. We'll worry about that last. What we need right now is we need to set up this validate function. Okay, so this function is basically going to be invoked internally. Okay, it's going to take care of underneath the hood, and it's going to basically give us, so it's not going to give us a username and password, but instead it's going to give us an access token, which is going to be a string, a refresh token, which is also a string, and it's going to give us a profile object, which is going to be a profile that is basically going to be coming from Passport Discord. So I'm going to import that so we get IntelliSense, but if I type profile over here, you'll see I have all of the data over here. Okay, that's pretty cool. So now that we have this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just console log some stuff. So I'll console log, let's do the, well, you know, let me actually destructure some stuff. So we're going to need, let's see, the discriminator, ID, avatar. I think that is all we need. I think that's all we had created for entity. Yep, that's fine. And I'll just console log all of these. So we will need to save the refresh token, but we'll save that later on though. Okay. Okay, so let's go ahead and do one more thing. So right now, I know for a fact that we have not done anything with this strategy other than just defining it. The reason why is because we actually haven't even injected it anywhere. Okay, so what we need to actually do is we need to actually inject our strategy. We need to provide it. Okay, so we're going to provide this strategy right over here. Okay, and you can see now it's going to give us this type error. OAuth2 strategy requires this parameter over here. And because we don't have it, I'm not sure why it's saying authorization URL, because it really should be, it should really be complaining about the, it should really be complaining about other stuff. Let me see. Yeah, there we go. It's because I didn't pass anything. But there we go. We have the, yep, it's complaining about the client ID, which is fine. That's fine. We'll get those later. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we have our strategy being invoked, which is good. But we're not done yet. Okay, we're not quite done yet. But what I'm gonna do first is, you know what I'll do? I'll go ahead and get my credentials, so that way we don't have to deal with this error. Once we get the credentials, what we're going to do is we're going to invoke the actual strategy. And I'll show you guys how to do that using guards. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to create the Discord application. So we're going to go to new application, and I'm going to call this OAuth2 NestJS. Alright, so what we're going to do here is we're going to get the client ID. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to place that inside here. So Discord credentials, leave comment here. We'll do Discord client ID. We're also going to need the client secret, so I'll just write that real quick, and then the Discord callback URL. So you can also regenerate the secret in case in case it gets leaked, but the secret is what you want to keep, you know, secret. The client ID can be public. That's not really sensitive data, but yeah, you can always regenerate the secret if it ever gets you know, compromised. Like if anyone ever figures it out, you want, again, like I said, you want to make sure you keep this a secret, because if they have this, they can use this to pretty much, you know, do a bunch of bad stuff, and you don't want that. Alright, so now we just need the callback URL, so we're going to create that. So for my callback URL, again, you want to make sure you have it structured so that it matches this path over here. Okay, so /API/auth/redirect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add a redirect. Remember, this is the URL that Discord will call when you have successfully clicked on the authorize button. So we're going to do HTTP localhost port, I think it's 3001, then API/auth redirect. And you can have a bunch of other redirects too. So it's very useful. Let's say if you have a production domain that you want to call, you can do it as well. Okay, and that should be it. We don't really need to worry about the URL generator because the passport library will take care of that for us. Okay, and I think that should be it. Yeah, let me just make sure. Okay, great. Yeah, so API auth login, API auth redirect. That's our redirect over here. Perfect. So let me go over to development, and let me just set that API auth redirect. All right, and that is pretty much it. So that's pretty much it for the credentials. Okay, now I'm going to go over to production over here, and like I said, let's say for example for development you might use a different Discord application compared to production, which a lot of people do. You can pretty much, you know, paste this inside here and swap between the two. It's up to you. But in production though, most of the time you will be redirecting to a different domain, so you can always pass in, like, you know, the HTTPS, but you don't have to worry about that right now. Okay, you can pass in the actual full URL, but for localhost, from my experience, I was able to just pass in the relative path. For production, you might need to pass in like the actual full URL, like, you know, HTTPS google.com, for example, whatever your domain name is. So just wanted to give a heads up on that. Okay, and I'll also just do, let's see, Discord client ID, just so I can have IntelliSense. And let's do secret, and then Discord callback. Well, you want to make sure these are all the same name as the environment variable. Okay, that's fine. And yes, that should be it. So let's go over to our strategy. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna need to pass in the client ID. So process.env.discord client ID. Now, for some reason, Nest.js, or maybe it just might be my TypeScript configuration, it doesn't, it's not in strict mode right now, so it's not going to complain about, it's not really going to complain about, you know, it possibly being null. That's something that I just realized right now, but that's something I would recommend you guys to enable, because that's the whole point of TypeScript, is to, you know, check for null, potential null issues. Okay. But I'll leave that alone for now. Client secret. And we'll set the callback URL. So for this, we'll do process.env.discord callback URL. And finally, we're going to set scopes. So we need the scope or scope. Okay, and this is just an array of all the scopes we need. So for Discord, they should have some documentation on all the potential scopes that you can get. Yeah, it's actually right over here. Actually, you can look at all the scopes. Identify email connections. Okay, I'm only just gonna ask for identify and guilds. Okay, so this will give us all of their basic stuff like the username discriminator, avatar URL, and then this will give us all the guilds that the user is in. So that should be pretty much it. Now, if I save, you should see that this won't throw the error anymore, like before it did. Right, it's missing the client ID. Okay, but now it's working just fine. Okay, now how do we actually invoke this strategy? Well, we do that by using a guard. Okay, that's how we're going to invoke the strategy. We're going to use what's called a guard. So right now, if I were to, let me actually see if I can visit the application real quick. So let me actually move this to the other screen. And let's visit /API/auth/login. So right now, nothing's going to happen. Okay. And that's obviously working the way it is because we aren't doing anything. We need to actually invoke the strategy by getting the actual guard. So let's implement that. We're going to implement the guard right now. Okay, so like I said, if you want, you can read more about guards on the official Nest.js documentation, but it's basically, it only has one single responsibility, and you can see over here it says they determine whether a given request will be handled by the route handler or not. And that makes sense because, again, you might want to protect certain routes. Okay, you might want to prevent it from being accessed by someone who isn't even logged in. Okay, so that's what these guards are for. Now I'm going to show you how to create a simple guard. It's really easy actually. So to create the guard, what we're going to do is we're going to go inside the auth folder. We're going to create a guards folder, and we're going to call this index.ts. And what we're going to do is we're going to import some stuff from Nest.js commons. So let's do from Nest.js common. And we're going to import can activate. We're going to import execution context. And we're going to import injectable. Okay, because this guard is going to be injectable. We're going to inject it to wherever we need it. So we're going to first create the guard that's going to be used to invoke the Discord strategy. So we're going to call this Discord auth guard. Call it whatever you want. We're going to extend the auth guard class. This is going to come from Nest.js passport. We're going to need to pass in the type. So this is going to be the name of the strategy. So if you're using Discord, you'd pass in Discord. If you're using Google, you'd pass in Google. Twitter, etc. We're going to pass in Discord. Okay. And what we need to do here is we need to implement the canActivate function. And this canActivate function is basically going to return to us a Boolean value. Okay, now I think the documentation actually has a really good example. Let's see real quick. Let me see. So the canActivate function takes a single argument, the execution context instance. So the execution context actually has a bunch of arguments. So it has things like the request, and we can actually use that to check to see if the user is actually, logged in or not. Okay, but like I said, there's a lot of examples on the documentation, but I noticed that seems like they don't really have like a specific one for OAuth2. So I'm going to try to do my best to explain how you guys can do this with OAuth2. So first, let's take in the context, and let's type annotate this because this is the execution context. Okay, and this is just going to return a promise of any for now. And we're going to go ahead and create a variable called activate. And we're going to go ahead and call the superclasses can activate. Okay, and this returns a boolean. So we're going to go ahead and pass in the context. Okay, and we're going to annotate this as a boolean. So activate is a boolean. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and then call context.switch to HTTP. So this will switch the context to HTTP. We're going to get the request. Okay, so this is going to get the request object. And what we want to do is we want to then call this function login. Okay, this we need to pass in the request object over here. And then we'll just return activate. Now I'm going to go ahead and console log some stuff just so you guys are aware of what's really going on. So let me actually console log the request. Let me console log activate. And let's see how this works. Okay, now let's go over here into our auth controller. All right, so now to invoke this guard, what we're going to do is we're going to call use guards, and then we're going to reference this guard auth guard. Okay, so now our application should be running just fine. Let's go over to here. Let's refresh. Now it's saying invalid redirect URI. Let's see. Oh, I think I may have done localhost port 3000. Instead, it should be. Well, no, wait a minute. It says 3000, but on the actual application, I have set it to port 3001. So why is that the case? That's. Oh, am I still? Oh, I'm not running on port 3000. That's why. That makes sense. Let me fix that. I forgot to get the port. Const port equals process env port. And if that's undefined, we'll run it at port 3003. So let's do this, and let's just create a callback, just so we know that it's running on port. Right, there we go. Perfect. So let's go to here. If I try to go to port 3000, that's not going to work. So /API/auth, and let's go to /login. There we go. So OAuth2 Nest.js wants to access your account, access your user avatar, know what servers are in, and that is being invoked from the guard right over here. Okay, so we need to have this guard. Let me see if I can show you the logs real quick. I think we actually need to authorize. Okay, so this is okay. Let me just look at the logs. If it logged anything, seems like it didn't log anything though, which is quite interesting. Oh, the reason why is because we actually need to use the guard for the redirect as well. Okay, see how over here it called the redirect with the code because we've successfully clicked authorize, which is what we did, and it gives us the code. Now we need to invoke the guard again, so that way the strategy will actually get the credentials for us. Once it gets the credentials for us, it'll then be able to call this validate function. That's how Passport works underneath the hood. Okay, so let's go ahead and invoke the guard for redirect. So use guards, Discord auth guard. Now if I try to refresh, it's going to give us an error. That's fine, but you can see, no, it's fine. It's not going to give an error because we haven't used this code to exchange it for anything yet, so it's okay. But you can see over here that right now we have used the code to exchange for our credentials, or not credentials, but our data. And we have our Arizona, that's the username, the discriminator, the ID, and null. What is this null part? Where's that coming from? Oh, that's avatar. Okay, that's fine. Okay, now if I try to refresh, it's going to give us an error because we cannot use this code again. That's why you'll get the invalid code in request. If you ever get that error, that happens because you're trying to use a code that's already been exchanged with the Discord API for the credentials. Now the codes usually expire, I think, every 10 minutes, so there's only a 10-minute window. But you shouldn't really be saving these though, okay? So yeah, that's pretty much it. So that's really how this guard works. Though I'm not sure why nothing was being logged over here. Let me try this again. Let me see. I think maybe these might just be yeah, I'm not sure why these aren't being logged up, but it's okay. But yeah, don't worry so much about like this guard. But like I said, all you really need to worry about is this guard is required to basically control what requests are able to be processed by the handler or not. So again, this will pretty much be used for redirecting to the OAuth2 page for Discord. Okay, now once we are logged in, we can create our own custom guard to actually control whether or not the user is authenticated. Okay, so right now we are logged in, but we aren't really saving sessions anywhere. So that's why if I were to visit other routes, it's always going to give me a 401 unauthorized. Okay, so there's a couple things that we need to do. One, we need to implement a guard that is going to allow us to visit the route only if we are authenticated. We also need to configure sessions, and we also need to initialize passport as well, because we haven't done those things yet. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do first is let me go into main.ts, and I'm going to need to install express sessions. So yarn add express session. Okay. Yep, that's fine, and we're going to install the types. Okay, perfect. So we're gonna go here and we're gonna import as session from express session. We'll also need to import as passport from passport. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here and we're going to set up session. And inside this session, well, this is a function. Inside the object, we're going to pass in the cookie. So we're going to set the max age. So this is how long the session will live for, or the cookie. I'm just going to do, I think, 1 day. So I think that should be fine. So this should be, usually what I do is I just do 60,000, which is, if I remember correctly, that's 1 minute times 60. Okay, so that's 1 minute times 60, that's 60 minutes, so that's 1 hour. Okay, that times 24, that's a whole day. But basic math, you just do 60 times 24. Okay, or you can just, put this into Google, and this will give you this number back. Okay, we're going to set the secret to a random string. You want to make sure you keep this a secret, because this is what's used to actually encrypt the cookie. Okay, so we're also going to set resave to false, and then save initialize to false as well. Alright, don't worry so much about these two properties, just make sure you have them set to false for the time being. Okay, basically the reason why we need save initialize set to false is because if we don't do that, it's going to create a bunch of new sessions for us, even when we're not logged in, right? So for example, we only want to save the session only if the user has logged in. Underneath the hood, what happens is the session object gets modified once they have logged in, and that's when we will not create the new session for the user. But like I said, don't worry so much about that though. Okay, so now that we're set with that, we just need to do app.use. We're going to register passport, so we're going to call passport.initialize. And again, it's the same thing that you do with express. Okay, All right, so we've done that part. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to actually go into the app.module right over here, and we need to import passport module, and then we need to register, and we need to set session to true. Okay, so that should be just fine. We've already took care of setting up the actual session stuff. Okay, so what we need to do next is we need to also set up serializing and deserializing the user. Okay, so serialization and deserialization is basically just a way how we can save the session, or how we save the user to the session. So you can save the user's ID, you can save their user and password, not password, but their username, their avatar, whatever it is that you want. And when we serialize it, that's basically going to save it to the session store. Okay, it'll save it either into the memory store or a database. And every single time we make a request, we need to deserialize the user's session. So what happens is when we actually send the user a cookie, that cookie is going to be sent to the server every single time. And we use that cookie, we decrypt it. Okay, we make sure the cookie is valid. We check the database to see if that cookie is actually still there. If it is, that means the cookie could be good. We also need to check the expiration date as well. Okay, and once everything is good, we will send the user back a response. Okay, so we need to actually handle that part. So inside the auth folder, we're going to go ahead and go inside, let's go create a new folder. I'll just call this, I'll call this utils. And I'm going to go ahead and you know what, actually, I should have probably created the guards inside utils, but it's fine. I'm going to go ahead and just create a serializer.ts file. And we're going to need to go ahead and create a class. I usually just call it session serializer. And we need to extend passport serializer. Now I know everything might be a little bit confusing because we haven't really tested much things out, but like I said, don't worry. Once you actually get through this, it'll be very simple. I know it might be a little bit hard to understand, and especially when, it might be hard to debug because we're doing so much all at once. But don't worry, it should be pretty straightforward though. Okay, so let's go ahead and go inside here. Comment. Let's use the injectable decorator. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and just call the constructor. And so for the session serializer, we need to call the auth service. So actually not the auth service, but the user service. So right now we don't have a user service that is used for getting the data from the user. So we're going to need to create that later. So leave that alone for now. And we're going to implement the serialized user and the deserialized user method. Okay. So with these two, we're going to need to, for serialized user, this is just a simple function that's going to take in two parameters. It's going to take in the user type, the user object. Okay. And it's going to take in a function called done. So I want to annotate this as function, but I don't think it's going to let me because of my ESLint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to annotate it like this. It's going to take in either an error or it's going to take in a user, if I remember correctly. And then the return will just be a void. So now all I do is just do done null user. So this function tells Passport how to serialize, how to save the actual session to the store. So we're going to save the actual user. Now what happens then is the serialized user is going to need to take in that user object, and the done function will be the same exact thing. Okay. And what we're going to do is we need to actually do a couple things. We need to find the user from the database. If that user is found, then we will return that user. We're going to call done with null, so no error, and the actual user from the database. Okay, call user DB. And if the user has not been found, we need to pass in null and null. Okay. So we need to actually do a couple things before we can even implement what's going on over here. before we can actually implement these things, we need to actually do a couple things. One, we need to actually go back and configure our service so that we can actually get the user from the database, and we also need to create the user. So there's a couple things we need to do, so we're going to do that real quick. All right, so I know I mentioned earlier that we needed a user service, but I'm not going to go ahead and create another service. I'm just going to make this as simple as possible. So what I'm going to do is inside the auth service, I'll just take care of creating the user and retrieving the user from there, so we don't have to keep worrying so much about creating all these services. Okay, so what I'm going to do is inside auth service, let me actually go over here. Let me just go ahead and create the auth.ts file, because we want to practice what we preach. We want to go ahead and create that interface so we can program to the interface instead of implementation. So I'll just call this, instead of calling auth service, just call this authentication provider. And what I'll do is I'll create a couple of methods. So we'll need a validate user method. We'll need, let's see, create user, I guess. And then we'll need a find user by ID, but I'll just call it find user. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll implement authentication provider, and we'll just simply implement all these, and that's it. All right, so like I said earlier, if we go back to our, let's see, our strategy, just kind of like recap, because I know we've done a lot. If we go back to the strategy is what we're going to use to invoke our actual auth service, right? So over here, Discord strategy, we need to first inject the auth service, and then we need to call this validate user method. Okay, so now that I have my interface, let's go ahead and close this, and let's go inside Discord strategy. Before we do that, we want to provide a token for our constructor, because like I said, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do private auth service. We don't want to do that. That's not what we want to do. We want to use tokens to inject it. Okay, so we're going to go into auth module, and for auth service, what we're going to do is, let me actually fix some of my issues over here, because we have linting issues. I want to make sure any error that we get has to do with what we're about to expect right now. Okay, so we're going to go into auth module. Let's get rid of the auth service, and let's do provide auth service, use class auth service. Okay, so that should be fine. And we're only going to be using the auth service inside the auth module. We're not going to be using it anywhere else. So I don't think we need to export it. Okay, so now inside let's see, where do we want to go? Let's see, inside strategy, yep, we're over here. So now what we want to do is, like I said, instead of having to do private auth service like this, we use the inject function. We pass in the token, so auth service, just like that, and then private read only auth service. And instead of type annotating auth service, we do authentication provider, which is the interface. Okay, because like I said, if we create other methods inside the implementation, we might be able to reference it accidentally. You don't want to do that. Okay, you want to reference methods on the interface itself. Okay, so now we're going to go over here, and let's actually update our interface. So what we're going to do is we need to actually provide some parameters. Now, what exactly is it that we expect the user to pass into this function, or us rather? Right, so for validate user, we need to actually pass in the details. So we need to pass in the username, discriminator, ID, avatar. So I'm going to go ahead and create a type. I'm going to create my own custom type. And I'll do that over in utils. So I'm going to create a new folder called utils inside source, right over here, source utils. And I'm going to call this types.ts. And I'm going to do this, export, we'll call this type, user details. Call it whatever you want, doesn't matter. And user details will basically have a username, string, discriminator, string, ID string. Well, actually, I'm going to change this to Discord ID. I want to create this type based around our TypeORM entity. Okay, so avatar string. Another thing that you could do is, like, some people may be tempted to use this user entity. The problem with that is that it's going to give you an error saying that it's missing the ID. So something that you could do is you probably create its own interface, like export interface user type, for example, or iUser, and then you can use what you can do is you can create the properties on here, right? And then you can implement this interface, so it'll force you to have all these properties. If you don't have it, it'll complain. And then what you can do next is you can just add the ID, which is optional, right? You don't need it, but you should have it there. And then you can just use this iUser as the actual type. Okay, so it's kind of like, you know, making it reusable, but we'll just do this for now. So we'll just call this details, user details, and that's going to get imported from up here. I don't like how it's importing it from, I don't like how it provides the relative path though. It's quite annoying. Where is this? Okay, there we go. All right, so we have validate user, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and call await this.auth service, validate user, and we need to pass in our details. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. Let's do const details, user details, or we'll just do this. Username, discriminator, Discord ID, avatar. Now, Discord ID is undefined, but we're going to we're going to change this ID name to Discord ID. We're going to destructure ID, but rename it to Discord ID. You can do that in TypeScript or in JavaScript in general. Now we pass in details, and now it's going to throw an error. So let me actually walk through the code. Let me walk through the process, because I know we're doing so much, but I want to help you guys understand this. So if I do this right now, it's going to throw an error. You can see the status code is 500, and that's fine because it says method not implemented. But it's okay because we know that it's calling this validate function from our strategy, and then it's going to call this a validate user method. That is 100% okay. All right. Now in this validate user method, we need to take in the details, and we need to do a couple things. Okay, so inside this auth service, so like I said, typically you would have a user service, but because I don't want to keep creating so many services all at once, I personally would do it, but because this service really is only just responsible for creating the user, find the user, etc., I'm just going to go ahead and not create the service, okay? But if you want to, you can. I feel like that would be good practice for you, but just for this sake, I'm just not going to create the service. So what we're going to do is we need to find the user, okay? We're only going to create the user if they are not in the database. So how do we do that? Well, first we need to find a way to interact with our database. Well, since we're using TypeORM, we can easily do that by injecting the repository. So how do we do that? Well, let's implement the constructor, and we're going to first do this. We're going to inject repository. So this is from TypeORM. Okay, so before we were using inject, and we're passing a token. Now we're using repository, inject repository. So this is going to take in the entity. So one thing I should mention is that these entities, they have their own token. Okay, so if you were to have duplicate entities, that would be an issue. So since we don't have that, that's fine. We're going to pass in the user type. That's going to be imported from our TypeORM path. Okay. Let me fix this as well. And then we're going to say private user repo, short for repository, user repository. And I'm going to type annotate this to be a user, or repository, which is a generic type, user. Okay, so now what I can do is I can go ahead and do const user equals await, and we need to make this an async function. This.user repo find one. Okay, let me actually minimize the sidebar, the file explorer. We're going to find it by the Discord ID. So let me actually destructure that real quick. Okay, so we can find it by Discord ID. So if the user is found, we will return the user. If they are not found, what we're going to do is we're just going to create it. Okay, it's very simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just simply call this create user function. I think that's what I'll do. So we'll do await, we'll do const new user equals await this dot create user. We'll pass in the details, and we need to go back to our auth.ts file, and this is going to be the same parameters. Okay, and then let's do that, and then we'll just create it. Okay, so right now we don't have anything in our database, so we need to actually create the user. So what we'll do, well, actually, before I create it, let me just log something, creating user. We're going to take this step by step. Okay, so now we are getting an error. It says user repository is a provider. Is it part of the current auth module? If you get this error, the reason why it's happening is because we need to actually tell our auth module, and we need to say, hey, look, we are expecting a user repository to be used in here. Let's import that. So how do we do that? Well, there's a couple ways, but what we're going to do is we're going to go into our auth module.ts file right over here, and we're going to go over to imports. So imports, and we're going to go and import TypeORM module, and we're going to call it .forFeature, and we're going to pass in the entities that we need. So we're only really going to need the user entity, so we'll just import that, and that should be fine. And there we go. If I reload, well, it'll reload automatically. You can see that it works just fine. Okay, and the nice thing about the logs is that it'll tell you what's going on. But I don't think it talks about the repository though. The user repository, but yeah, it's fine though. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So let's go back to our strategy file, the Discord strategy. Right, and then you're going to see what's going to happen is it's going to call a validate user. The validate user is going to find the find a user from the repository. It's going to print undefined because we don't have anything in the database, right? We don't have anything in here. So since nothing is there, it's going to call create user. So let's test everything out just to make sure it works. Okay, so it's saying for unauthorized, what happened? Undefined creating user, since this returns null, that's why it gives us a 401 unauthorized. So let's create the user. So this is a two-step process. First, we need to actually create the actual entity. So we do that by saying this.userRepo.create, and this is where we can pass in all the fields. We can pass in Discord ID, discriminator, etc. But since we've already created this user details type, we can just do details like that. And then we need to save it, so we can do that by saying this.userRepo.save, and we'll pass in user. And I'm just going to return this promise, okay? And since we're awaiting it, we know that this is going to give us back a user. So let me actually do this. Okay, yeah, I can actually reference that as well. Perfect. Okay, so we will just also, I think we could just return this call as well, since we're not really doing anything else after that. So that should be perfectly fine, I think. Yep, that's pretty much it. So creating user, I think that's it. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so now, let's see. Let's go over to here. Okay, so validate user now. We're going back to validate user, right? We're going back to where we called the validate user function. So what do we do after we have done everything, right? What are we supposed to do next? Well, inside this strategy file, what we want to do is we basically just want to make it so that it just returns after we are done, after we're done validating. Okay, So ideally, we could just probably do something like, return, because we know it's going to either return the current user or create one. So theoretically, this should always work just fine, unless if our database is down. If it is, then it would just return a 500 status code. Okay, so now I think that should realistically be all we need to do, because we already have the serialization done. Oh, we haven't finished the serialization yet. But currently, let's test everything out. Let's see what happens. So it gives us an error. Okay, that's fine. But let's look at our database. You can see we have our user. So we know that it works. Okay, we know that it works. The reason why it's throwing the error is it says it failed to serialize the user into the session. That's because we didn't finish implementing our serialization part. Let's do that. Okay, so now hopefully everything can start to make sense, because I know before we were just kind of doing everything all at once. But hopefully now it should be better. So our serialized user is fine. Our deserialized user is not fine. We need to fix that. Before I do anything else though, let me go ahead and actually copy this and put this in a type. Custom type. Let's do export type. And I can call this, I'll just call this done. And this will just be a function. And we need to import the user entity from TypeORM. Okay, perfect. And we will just import done from types. Okay, and we'll type annotate this. You can type annotate functions too, which is awesome. Okay, so inside deserialized user, it's a two-step process. Okay, so since over here we're calling null user, okay, since we're passing in the user object, we need to actually search the database by passing in the user ID. So this is where we need to actually get our constructor implemented. So let's do that. And we need to get the auth service. So let's inject the auth service. Private read-only auth service. And authentication provider. Remember, that's the interface, right? That's the interface. What's going on over here? Oh, we need to call super. Forgot about that. Okay, perfect. So now what we do is we say const userdb await this dot auth service dot find user, and we haven't actually implemented that yet, so we need to do that. Let me actually make this an async function as well. So we need to go into let's see, services. Let's go into auth.ts. We need to take in the ID. So let's do Discord. We're gonna find by Discord ID. You can also find by the SQL primary key, the SQL auto incremented key if you want to, but we'll just find by Discord ID. One thing that I forgot to do actually, and let me do that real quick, is I forgot to actually make this Discord ID property unique. Okay, so let's do that real quick. Okay, that's fine. Even though it theoretically shouldn't create duplicate because we wrote the code to check, but you never know. But yeah, just set it to unique though, just to be safe. Okay, because ideally though, you could technically go into the database and you could, let me actually describe it again. You'll see now it should, yeah, like if I really wanted to, I could create a duplicate of this, but setting it to unique true will prevent it from happening. The reason why it hasn't synchronized the database yet is because we have an error. But look, if I describe it again, you'll see that it says unique. Before it didn't, now it does. So if I try to manually create a duplicate entry, I won't be able to, which is good. Okay, good practices go a long way. So let's go ahead and implement find user now. So it's going to take in a Discord ID. So we have to go into auth service, the implementation. Right now it throws an error. We're going to take in a Discord ID. And what we'll do is we will just, let's see, return this user repo find one. And this will return a user or undefined. Okay? So let's go ahead and do this. So let's pass in the user Discord ID. Okay, and you can see over here, right now we have a type annotated to return any, which is not good. So we should probably type annotate this so that we know that it returns a user or undefined. Okay. Let's go to the implementation, and we'll also do it as well. Promise user undefined. So now over here in serialization, if I were to reference this, I could have avatar. Okay, but there's a chance that this will be null, or there's a chance it will be undefined. TypeScript is not complaining about that because we have strict set to false. But what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, look, if userdb is truthy, we're going to use a ternary operator. If it's truthy, return no error, and then return userdb. Okay, that's the actual found record. Else, we'll return null and null. So there's no error, and there's no user. So this will serialize us into the session. Okay, we'll deserialize it, sorry. All right, so that should be it. Let's go ahead and try this out again. Authorize, and it's giving us another error. Let's see what's going on here. Why did it fail this time? Okay. Failed to serialize user into session. Interesting. Interesting. So that definitely is inside here. Let me just double check just to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we may have missed something somewhere. So let me just double check just to make sure. So we have done. We have get user. Okay. If it's truthy, return null null. That's also fine as well. Let's see. You know what? Let me actually just make sure. Let me just actually put some console logs just to make sure we are actually calling certain things. Okay, so we are finding one. This is gonna do the trick. Okay, let's try this again. It's a good thing that we are getting errors, so at least you guys can see how we're gonna find it. So it seems like right now, I'm not sure where everything is being logged, but let's see, it's not even calling this find user as well. So it seems like let's see, it's not even calling this find user, because if it was, it would log this ID. Oh, I know why. Completely forgot about this. We need to actually provide this. We need to provide this session serializer. Completely forgot about that. My apologies. All right, let's try it again. Perfect. There we go. Now it actually works, and if we look at the application tab, you can see we actually have a cookie. Now, if I were to actually restart the server, our sessions would be cleared because right now it's being stored in memory. So to fix that, you would want to store it somewhere inside like a database or Redis. Okay, don't worry, I know it's been such a long video, but we're almost done. I know we've done so much, but trust me, it's worth it, because once you know how to set all this stuff up, you can literally use this template to build full stack applications from scratch. It's ridiculously easy. Okay, so I know it seems like a lot, but trust me, it's going to be worth it. Nothing is going to be easy, but we're almost there. Don't worry. The last thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up a session store, so that way whenever we visit the route, whenever we restart the server and we visit the route, we will actually still be authenticated. But we still need to do one more thing that we but we held off until now. So right now, if I were to visit, let's say for example, let's go to controllers, okay? Let's go over to status and let's just return, okay. So if I were to go to status right now, it's going to give OK. But I only want the user to be able to visit this route if they are authenticated. This is where we need our authenticated guard. So we only have a Discord auth guard. We need an authenticated guard to let us know if the user is authenticated or not. Now this guard is going to be a lot easier. So we're going to just create this inside here, this guards file. And we're going to create a class called authenticated guard. We're going to implement the can activate interface. And what we're going to do is we're going to implement the can activate function. And this is going to take in the execution context. And this is just going to return a promise of any. And what we're going to do is we're first going to create a variable called rec. We're going to reference context We're going to switch the context to HTTP. So they actually have different contexts. I think RPC is something different. I think remote procedure call, which is another, I think it's another protocol. And there's also WebSockets, I think, which is for WebSockets. Yeah, so like I said, Nest.js comes with a lot of support with a lot of things. So you can switch the context to WebSocket if you want. But we're going to switch it to HTTP because that's our protocol. And we're going to get the request. And then what we're going to do is we're going to return rec is authenticated. And this will return a Boolean value. So whether or not the user is authenticated or not. Okay. I'm probably just going to get rid of this type annotation. I don't really like using any, to be honest with you. But yeah. So let's go ahead and just console log rec.is authenticated. Because I'm pretty sure this should be a Boolean. Okay. Let's go over here now. And to use this guard, we're going to do use guards. Authenticated guard. Okay, and we don't need to put this in the provider. That's fine. Okay. So let's go here. It's going to say forbidden. Now, if I look, now again, Nest.js handles this underneath the hood for us, which is great. If we look at the logs, you see it says false, so we know that it is a Boolean. So let me actually go back to the guards, and I'll just make this a promise Boolean just to be extra. Okay. Now, if I was authenticated, it would give us the actual resource. So let's actually authenticate. Let's authorize. Okay. So let's go to status, and we are authenticated, right? We are authenticated. This is true, right? If I restart the server, if I refresh, it's going to give us forbidden resource because we don't have our sessions saved to a persistent store. Okay, that's the problem. That's the problem. So what we're going to do next is we're going to pretty much just implement a session store. This is ridiculously easy. All we're really doing is we're just going to install a package that's going to save all of these sessions to a database. And every single time we restart a server, the sessions will still be in the database. Okay. And when it deserializes everything, it'll look in the database for our sessions. Okay, so that's pretty simple. But so for the store though, you can use whatever session store you want. They have like a bunch of different session stores. Let me actually show you guys this, because like I said, Nest.js is built on top of Express. So really, you can use literally any session store you want from here. So they have Cassandra, they have Couchbase, they have let's see, MongoDB. They have Redis, they have TypeORM, I think they do have a TypeORM store. Yeah, they do. So you can actually use the connect TypeORM package, but I'm going to actually just use Redis because I really like using Redis. Now, if you're on Mac or if you're on Linux, it's really easy to install Redis. If you're on Windows, they don't really have such great support for Windows or for Redis for Windows. What I do to get around this is I actually use Docker. Yeah, so Docker is really great for just pretty much installing stuff, installing things that you can run in a containerized environment. So you can see I have Redis running right now, so I can just pretty much use this for my session stores, which is pretty nice, and I'll show you guys how that works in just a sec. If you want, there are ways that you can install Redis onto Windows. But I know Docker is actually working fine on Windows with the new recent updates, so I would recommend you guys looking into that. Other alternatives, like I said, just use the TypeORM, connect TypeORM. It's really easy to set up. So let's install a couple things. So let me go ahead and create a new tab, Discord dashboard. Nope, CD dashboard tutorial, CD dashboard Nest.js backend. We're gonna add Redis. We're gonna add connect Redis, and then we're going to add the types. So types Redis, types connect Redis, and like I said, you can use TypeORM for this. You don't have to use Redis, okay? But I'm going to use Redis because I really like using Redis. And other alternatives, you can also probably spin up a VM. If for some reason Docker doesn't work for you, you can also spin up a virtual machine using something like VMware, and you can install Redis on there, and you can connect that locally. That also works too, but Docker should work just fine. I'll show you in just a sec. Okay, so let me go over to, let's see, let's go over to main.ts. We're going to import as Redis from Redis. We're going to import as, let's see, how did I do this before? If I remember correctly, I imported this as connect, I think. Let me just double check something real quick. As connect Redis from connect Redis. Okay, and what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and just create a client. So const client equals Redis, that create client, and then here you'll just pass in the URL. So I'm just going to do proc.env Redis URI, and inside the environment variable, let's do Redis. So we're going to just do Redis localhost. That's it. If you have other things like authentication, you would have to put that in the URI string as well. And let me just do Redis URI string. Okay. And after that, we will create a store. So const Redis store equals connect Redis. Pass in the session object. And then store, we will do new Redis store, pass in the client, just like that. Very easy. And I'm going to go ahead and do client.on connect, just to make sure we know that we are connected to Redis. Connected to Redis. And there you go. We're connected to Redis, and we're connected to the instance over here. If I were to stop this, right, it's going to throw an error. Yep, see, it can refuse to connect. If I spin this up again, and if I restart the server, it should just work just fine. But like I said, if you really can't get Redis to work for whatever reason, message me. Okay, let me know on Discord, and I'll do my best to help you out. I'm not so good with Docker, but I can try my best. Or I can help you set up the TypeORM for sessions. Okay, or we'll find some solution. Okay, but again, like I said, I'm using Redis because I want to. You don't have to use it. Don't feel discouraged. Okay, use whatever it is that you want. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So now that we have our Redis server running, okay, let's go ahead, and what I'm going to do is let me actually open up the CLI, and I'm going to go to Redis CLI, and if I do keys, you can see I have all my sessions over here. These are previous session keys that I have, but I can just do flush all, and that'll get rid of all of them. Okay, if you're using the connect TypeORM, you would pretty much just be looking in your database table. It would create a session database table for you, and you just look there. Okay, but let's go ahead, and now that we have our stores, let's go ahead and authorize. Okay, so we're authorized. Let's look at our keys. You can see we have a session. Okay, we have the session ID over here. Now, pay attention. If I look over here, you can see that I have this session ID over here, and you're going to see that this session ID will actually match this string right over here, right over here. Hopefully you guys can kind of see that. Okay, and now this dot, if I remember correctly, this dot will denote the rest. I think this is the encrypted cookie. I think that's the encrypted secret. If I remember correctly, this is a base64 string, and and everything after the dot is what is used to decrypt the cookie, if I remember. If I'm right, let me know. If I'm wrong, let me know what it actually is. But I'm pretty confident that's what it does with a dot. But yeah. And if I were to, so right now, look, if I were to, let me close this out. If I were to go to auth/status, it would give back okay. Let me actually make it give the actual user details. And that's the nice thing with Nest, is that this guard will literally take care of everything for us. So we can be very confident that this is what is going to give us back. Let me actually go ahead and get the request object. Hopefully I have that import up there. Okay, there we go. That's fine. I'm just going to return rec.user. Okay, see how now, even though the server restarted, see how now I still have it? Because we have all of our sessions saved here. If I do flush all, right? If I refresh, you can see now, because our session is not here anymore, it's going to say forbidden resource. Okay, it would work the same way with literally any session store. Okay, so that is really it with this whole thing. I know this was a really long tutorial, but yeah, that's pretty much it. So if this video made sense, leave a comment down below. I want to make sure I get your guys' feedback. And if you like this video, leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. And that's pretty much going to be it. So until next time, I'll see you in my next video. Peace out. So this is just going to be a quick follow-up video to the previous Nest.js setup tutorial, because I did use Redis, connect Redis for the session, and I know it doesn't really make much sense to have you guys, just use Redis out of nowhere. So I'm going to show you guys how to use this with TypeORM, because you guys are already using TypeORM, so it only makes sense to do a follow-up video showing you guys how to do this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and right over here, we have our connect TypeORM package. You want to make sure you install it. So first, make sure you install Express Session. We already have that already. Make sure you install connect TypeORM. And yeah, to make sure you also have TypeORM as well. So you want to make sure, let me just open this up, dashboard tutorial, dashboard backend, yarn add connect TypeORM. Okay, so just make sure you install that. Okay, I already had it installed already, so it seemed like I just did that. Okay, so now the next thing that you want to do is you want to go over to your code, and we first need to create an entity for the session. So literally, we're just going to follow this documentation. It's really easy. So just create a session.ts file, and we're going to go ahead and create a class called session. Actually, I'm going to name this. I'm going to just name this TypeORM session. And we're going to implement the iSession interface that comes from connect TypeORM. So you can see that this is where it's coming from. But let me just do this. Okay, so now it's going to complain and say that it's incorrectly implementing the interface. Go ahead and just implement all these fields, expired at, ID, and JSON. These are the required fields. Okay, and then all we do is we just follow the documentation. So we use the index decorator that comes from TypeORM to specify this as an index. Okay, you can see right over here, it creates a database index, can be used on entity property or an entity. Okay, so basically creates indices with composite columns. And then now we're going to use the column decorator, and we're going to specify the type as big int. That's for this number. And now we're going to have the public ID. So I think this is going to be the session ID that gets saved. So we're going to leave this as a primary column. The type is going to be a var char. And the length is going to be 255. That's fine. And then the last column is going to be the JSON column. So this is going to basically just be text. This is the session data that's saved. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we just simply go over to main.ts, and what we want to do is we want to get the session repository. So we can actually just delete all the Redis stuff because we're not going to need it anymore. Let's just delete this. Let's just delete this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get the session repository. So to do that, we're going to go ahead and call the get repository function that's from TypeORM. And we're going to go ahead and pass in the TypeORM session. So that's going to be imported. Okay, now we're actually going to get an error. So you're going to see that it says the repository was not found. That's because we haven't actually registered our repository. So we're going to go into our index.ts. Remember this entities array? This is exported so that we can just easily import this and we can register all of our entities in one go. So I'm going to first import, let's see, TypeORM session from session. So TypeORM session. That'll be imported up there, and then we'll export it over here. So now it'll just be auto-registered, so I shouldn't get that error anymore. Let's see what's going on. What's going on? We have get repository. Let's see. We have entity over here. We have TypeORM session. So it should be fine, though I'm not sure why it's complaining about it not being registered. That's interesting. Oh wait, I forgot to annotate this. That was such a silly mistake. Okay, there we go. Now it should work. I was like, I knew I did everything correctly, but I forgot that part, so that's okay. So yeah, we don't need the get connection. We can just use get repository because we are already connected to TypeORM. Okay, so if everything goes well, you should see it should say the tables over here, TypeORM session. You can actually just change the name real quick. If you go over to entities, just change the name of this to sessions. Okay, and then you just show tables, and you can see that that's a new table. TypeORM session. If I save it again, there we go, perfect. And we can describe the sessions. Okay, there we go, perfect. And now let's test this out. Oh, actually, we're not done yet. We actually have to go over here. We have to say new, and we need to, well, not new, we have to say store, new, and we need the TypeORM store. So I'm going to go ahead and import that. From connect TypeORM. Just make sure it's the correct one. Yep. Oh, it's, yeah, there we go, perfect. So we create the new TypeORM store. Okay, and there's options, but we're not going to worry about that. We're going to call connect, and we're going to connect the repository just like that. And now there should be no error. Now if I select from sessions, should just be an empty set. Now let's go ahead and let's log in. So there we go. We have our status. So if I select database, you can see I have the expired at time, the ID, and everything else. Okay. I think that should be it. If you want, you can probably get away with changing this to a date. You can do like something like a date time, maybe. Let's see what's. Oh, okay. I think we can't because it implements this interface. I think that's probably the reason why, but it's fine. You can do it like this if you want. I think this is the timestamp, so you can easily just like, you know, convert it to whatever it is that you want. So like for example, yeah, like if you go into the shell, if you type node, if you just create a new date from the time, not a timestamp, but like this is the time, the milliseconds, and you can see that it will just give you the next dates. So this is in UTC, so I think it's +5 hours. So you can see that it'll expire December 25th, 11, seems like it's 11 a.m. Yep, perfect. All right, and now, so if I were to refresh the server or restart the server, and if I were to refresh the page, you can see I'm still logged in. If I were to delete the session, you can see if I refresh, it'll say forbidden. So we have to create a new session by logging in. There we go. Okay, and let's just do one more thing. Let me go ahead and delete the session. Okay, so it's forbidden, that's fine. Let me just change the time to 10 seconds. And let me go ahead and log in. So let's log in. So that's fine. So we're currently logged in. And you can see that if I select from the session, that's gonna be just fine. If I refresh now, a couple seconds, it should expire. That's perfect. All right, though the session is still in the database, but we do need to log in. And there you go. So that is pretty much it. So again, it's very easy to set up connect TypeORM. Like I said, if you want to use Redis, you can. I would recommend using Redis maybe like long term maybe, but just for now, just use TypeORM for sessions. It works very easily. And yeah, that's going to be pretty much it for this whole tutorial. So hopefully you guys like this video, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Peace out.